Welcome to my house. I remember hearing that chilling voice. The voice of the actor Robert Bowick beckoning you within. Darn, I love this game. I'm a huge fan. Even bought the book, The Seventh Guest. But who is the seventh guest? Well, that is the mystery. I remember hearing about this game back when I was a console gamer, playing on my Nintendo. Gamers would talk about it. It was this big, scary game on the computer and it looked amazing as well, like nothing else out at the time. Eventually, I got a PC, and one of the first games I bought for it was The Seventh Guest. It came packed on 2 CDs. I remember that this was a big deal back then. Video compression. The game's lead programmer, Graham Devine, talks about it in a couple of the interviews I have seen him in. All that hard work getting that film footage and all that audio onto a CD was no mean feat in the early 90s. Games were still being put on cartridges at the time, at least for the consoles, and floppy disks for the computers. I can remember the agony of using floppy disks back in the day. Big games were spaced across a large number of floppy disks. Monkey Island 2, for example, came packed on a whopping 11 disks. Yes, 11. Imagine that. And you can almost guarantee one of those floppy disks was faulty, and you would have to post it back to the company it came from for a replacement. I did this for my copy of Worms. I remember that long ago. Oh gosh, yeah, it was fun times. But this was the time of the FMV game, a time when producers were discovering the meteor storage capabilities of the CD, and they were starting to fit movies onto the little round discs. A lot of games were developed with movie scenes at this time in gaming history. FMV games are often maligned these days. Rightly so, but I can remember the advert for the Flip CDI, and I can remember being really impressed at seeing real actors inside a game. It seemed like the technology of the future was with us. The age of digital data that we enjoy today was still but a dream. So was the internet, at least in our homes, but the CD felt like something handed down to us from an advanced era, at the time anyway. So as you can imagine, I was excited to play The Seventh Guest. I can remember putting the CD into my machine for the first time and being scared to death by the atmosphere. Good gosh. The dark, creepy house, the setting for the game, the winding steps of the foyer, the shadowy corridors, and all the horrible paintings. Ghosts would appear in front of you suddenly, and I remember, it was really horrible. I remember the hands coming out of the painting at the top of the stairs. Perfectly dreadful stuff. Makes me shiver right now, just thinking about it. Whew. The Seventh Guest is a puzzle game. Its setting, a haunted house full of horrors. The house itself is pre-rendered and very, very impressive. Well, it was for the day. You can see how Team Trilobite, the creators of the game, built the environments using the 3D engine in an exclusive behind-the-scene video that came packed with the original game. But these days you can find the video floating around the internet and you can watch it for free, which is really nice. The Seventh Guest also comes packed with numerous interesting FMV sequences. The guests who haunt the house and guide you along the story are played by real actors. Green screened, if you watch the behind the scenes documentary, you'll find that they were actually purple screened into the game. The effect is old and looks a little fuzzy, but it works well. If anything, it makes the ghosts appear more ethereal. And this is what I like most about the game. The ghosts, the characters. I wanted to know more about the history of this whole weird and warped affair. But at its heart, The Seventh Guest is still a puzzle game. I found the puzzles in the game somewhat mind-bending. If you play the game, I imagine you will be familiar with the infamous microscope puzzle, yes? Very annoying. I needed to fetch my dad to help me out with solving most of the puzzles in the house. There were a few I can proudly say I completed all by myself. I remember the spiders on the front door and the toy house up in the attic being my favourite solo triumphs. But like I just mentioned, it was the FMV, the full motion video scenes with the guests that really earned my love of the game. That, and of course, the amazing soundtrack by George Sanger, a.k.a. The Fat Man. The music it's great. Honestly, especially the foyer music. That is my favorite track. The storyline for The Seventh Guest is this. An evil genius toy maker called Staff. That's forced backwards. He is going to live forever. Now, Staff is a baron, and he builds evil dolls to ensnare the souls of all the children in the nearby town. After closing down his wealthy toy factory, Staff builds the house on the hill. And when he is finished, he closes the doors on the world forever. Then one day, many years later, Stauf invites 6 guests to stay the night in his house. The guest who makes it all through the night without going mad or killing someone will have their wish granted to them. But as we discover, spoiler alert, all the guests go mad and kill each other. Your task is to find the 7th guest. That's Tad, a young lad whose soul Staff wants to feast upon. You have to work your way through the rooms of the house, solving the puzzles that lie in wait, unraveling the story of what happened to the 6 guests that blood-curdling night as you go along on your adventure. And when you are done, if you are ready, you will finally confront Stauf in his attic chamber and save Tad from his evil, vile clutches. Exciting stuff indeed, and very dark and spooky. Now, I'm going to talk about my favorite part of the game, and I know this is going to sound strange, but okay, let's just do this. My favorite part of the game? Yes, it's the acting. I love it. It's so cheesy and over the top. Not B-movie cheese, but stage acting cringe. It was like a really badly done play on a stage where the actors were drafted in on the spur of the moment and had no idea what they were doing. And after they did what they could, they were all awkwardly inserted into a video game. I chuckle to this day at the acting when I watch it. I do find it funny. I just do. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Other people might not feel the same way. I also found the story of the 7th guest weirdly interesting as well. I couldn't understand what the guests were doing half of the time. It made no sense how they could jump from one room to the other, and some of the guests actually die twice. I know that Graham Devine and Rob Landaros, the duo who created the game, were heavily influenced by David Lynch's Twin Peaks, which was a very popular show at the time the 7th Guest was being made. I think with the influence of that show, Rob and Graham wanted to make the story of the 7th Guest as weird as possible, and in that effort they succeeded. There is a lot going on in Staff's old house, leaving lots of questions unanswered. Even the book didn't reveal much. I mean, who was the lady? in white at the top of the stairs? Why does Burden turn into a monster in the crypts? What's she even doing there? Why does Hamilton dress like a magician, even when he's not performing tricks? Why does Dutton become covered in green slime in his bedroom, and then eventually melting into the floor, and then come back later only to be killed again in the music room? What is the ghost in the mirror? What does the gramophone say in the music room? Why is the art room underneath the foyer? Why is there an ordinary door in the corner of Dutton's room leading to a chapel? Seriously? A chapel? The house makes no sense. At the end of the day, you have to make your own interpretation of what is going on. I think Staff's house is under the influence of some type of demonic power, and the different rooms in the house are actually alternate dimensions. My favourite guest in the game was Brian Dutton. There was something sinister about that man. He stood out from the other guests for me. In the story, he appeared to have a secret business relationship with Staff. There's a scene in the chapel where Dutton meets Staff and participates in a sinister sacrifice. I think Staff and Dutton were friends, and Staff intended for Dutton to win the game. But as the story unfolds, Dutton is ruthlessly stabbed to death by Edward Knox, ending his role, once and for all, in Staff's sinister plans. This game really appealed to me back in the day, and it still does. I'm still passionate about it. I love old and haunted houses, and I like Cluedo as well. The design of the Seventh Guest really reminds me of that game. I sat and thought about it one day, and the question I asked myself was this: has the Seventh Guest aged well over time? Over the years, since its release in the early 90s. Now, I'm going to have to be honest and say, no. It hasn't aged well at all. The goofy acting, which I admitted I like. The goofy acting, the old 3D graphics. As I said, I like all of those things, but I think someone new to the game, playing it today, will think the game is just a lot of nonsense. I imagine they would probably quit playing it in approx 5 minutes. I feel like the Seventh Guest is a game of its time. The 90s CD Rom, early computers, and FMV, it doesn't translate well to the modern era of gaming, and I think you have to have liked the game back in the day to still enjoy it now, especially to enjoy it in the way that I do. It had on me what I call the Star Wars effect. Okay, let me explain. People watching Star Wars for the first time in the 70s were soaked up in the magic of the movie, but 40 years on, and people today, especially children, might not look at that movie in the same way as their parents did. The movie isn't quite as fast-paced, or the special effects are not quite as good as the stuff that's being brought out in recent times. But, you know, the magic is still there for the parents who watched it back in the day, and that's kind of how the Seventh Guest was made. I think you have to have been there at the time to understand, you know, how great and how important and great the game was and still is. One thing that did almost ruin the game for me, and that is the internet. Why so, you ask? It's because the internet killed a lot of the mystery of the game for me. I read a blog where Graham and Rob described the hardships they had while developing the game, and some of the weird things that happen in the game. You know, things like characters saying weird stuff, characters dying twice, or disappearing from the story. All of that was actually the result of bad planning. And time constraints. They were rushed. It had nothing to do with clever writing. There was less of a mystery going on and more goofs in filming production, if anything. I felt disappointed when I learned about these things. The lady in white in the cellar and who haunts the top of the stairs was probably nothing more than an unused asset just thrown into the game at the last minute just to add a few cheap scares. But whatever. I still like the game. I still play it. And that's what the most important thing is. I would like a virtual reality version of the seventh guest. Imagine actually being able to walk around Staff's mansion in VR. Now that would be something. Rediscover the scares up close. Oh yes, I have played the fan-made sequel, The 13th Doll, and it really is quite nice. Captures some of the magic of the original and comes packed with its own corny FMV sequences, which is a bonus. For me it is anyway. Well, that's all I have to say about the house that Staff built. It's time for me to go back to the game and walk with the ghosts in the halls of shadow. Good luck out there.